Happy almost Hag HaPesach, everyone. So many of you have been asking for or hoping for another video regarding laws of baking matzah. In my first video, I went through some actual laws, and also in the description, I posted a link to all of the relevant laws of baking matzah. But I wanted to add some very quick notes that will help with this process. I'm going to break up the notes into kind of two separate categories. Notes in terms of just kind of calming yourself and following the halachot, because I think people kind of get lost in the weeds. You have to remember that originally everybody made matzah, including the uneducated, and including women who are often not raised with a lot of knowledge or understanding, but who are often cooking. I mean, we're talking like this is biblical times. This is Mishnaic times, right? So women's roles were severely limited. And the access of knowledge that they had was also severely limited, and yet they were the ones that were expected to bake matzah. Even the Rambam talks only in the feminine sense of when the woman is baking the matzah, because he's taken for granted that only she would do it. So so remember that these laws were expected that anyone could do it, whether or not they had a true halachic mind or a true understanding of all of the laws, because it was baking bread without any of the additional niceties that you would normally have for baking bread, such as being able to add some oil to it for taste, or salt, or spices, those kinds of things. So since people were often in the habit of baking bread anyways, they just knew how to bake matzah because you're doing the same thing, except you don't get to add all the special stuff or the things that make it easier, like adding oil for nonstick or adding extra flour for nonstick. So I'm going to go through some of the halachic concerns or things that concern people a little bit again, just to calm your mind. And then I'm going to give you some general understandings of making matzah. And those general understandings are just general understandings in making bread in general that would apply to this situation. Okay. So people are asking, am I only giving you Sephardi halachot, Sephardic rules? And the answer is, I'm giving you the laws as pertaining in the Shulchan Aruch, even with the Ramah's commentary. So I'm giving you kind of the standard, what's written on the books. We're not adding any extra humrot. We're not adding things that kashrut organizations have made up, or that very few poskim have tried to suggest that people do. We're using the Rambam. We're using the Shulchan Aruch according to Yosef Karo, and we're using the Ramah in situations where it applies or it needs some elucidation. And even sometimes I'm bringing in commentary from the person who wrote Mishnah Berurah. So, but what we're not doing is we're just not adding humrot. We're not adding anything that is unnecessary and anything that would prevent the mitzvah from being done in your own hands, which is a lot of the information that goes out there, a lot of information that people put out there, or that kashrut organizations put out. Put those humrot out there, put those fears out there to take the mitzvah away from your own hands. So all we're trying to do is give you the relevant laws and put the mitzvah in your own hands, because that's what the halacha expects of you. So the other thing to keep in mind is it's actually really hard to make hametz. It's actually difficult. If you're going to follow the rules as we're bringing down to you, it would actually be difficult to make hametz. Just keep that in mind. Like, this is going to be a very safe process. You might be concerned, oh, what if some flour flies off, because it kind of dusts up. That's great. Wipe it down. If it's powdered all over the place, it can't become hametz. So when you're done baking everything, then just go ahead and wipe and clean everything down. Don't worry about it while you're in the process of doing things. Don't worry about if something is sticking right now, because by the time you're done making it, like, everything's going to be moving, everything's going to be happening. It's not going to become hametz during the process. Just make sure you go through, you make your batch, and then after you're done, go through and clean everything up. If you are still really concerned that somehow you might accidentally make hametz, the Shulchan Aruch actually brings down a baracha, or a saying for you to make, to assuage your fears, and I guess to hopefully religiously bypass any accidental hametz is made. You can find this saying in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 460, section 3. In English, it says, one who needs after the onset of the prohibition. In other words, it's becoming Pesach. The Hag is about to start. So you're making it during the Hag, and you're worried that you're going to somehow accidentally make hametz. There's going to be a crumb that falls somewhere and you can't go get it. So when someone is needing, again, during the Hag, when this is the most strict time, one should say, all crumbs that fall during the kneading and preparation, and also the dough that sticks to the pots, I nullify. Thus, they are nullified before they even exist. So if you want to be stringent, you can go say that. Say it in English. Say it in Hebrew. Again, you can find it in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 460, section 3. All right. Someone asked, can matzot be made during the Hag? Yes, even during like the Hagim days, as long as you're following the normal laws of cooking and transferring fire, whatever your practice is, you can do it. If you are Sephardi and you believe that you can use electricity during the Hag and you want to use an electric oven, go ahead. For a separate discussion on using electricity during the Hag, there are many Sephardi poskim that you can look up. That is a separate discussion. Matzot can be cooked any way imaginable except for boiling them in water. So probably no pasta. You technically could make pasta if you made your dough only with oil. I think maybe, but that seems very unlikely. So don't attempt any pasta. Don't attempt cooking matzah in any water. The only caveat to that is if you've already finished baking the matzah or cooking the matzah, then you can grind it up and make matzah dough out of it and boil it in water if you want. Once the matzah is cooked, then it can't become cooked again. So then you can add it in water or do whatever it is you want to do with it. So anyways, matzot can be cooked any way imaginable except for boiling them in water. You can cook them in a skillet, overturned wok, electric oven, gas oven, throwing it on your stove grate and just letting the fire cook it. I don't recommend it, but the Shulchan Aruch talks about just throwing it on the coals and cooking it. So clearly the idea was however you can cook it so that it cooks all the way through, that's all you have to do. There's also no minimum or maximum temperature required in your cooking method. The only requirement is, again, that you cook it all the way through. That's it. And you should also probably not make it so thick that you can't cook it all the way through. Again, you can make it up to a tefah, a handbreadth thick, but I definitely recommend no thicker than a finger. And again, as thin as possible, they're usually easier to deal with, and that's the one we try to make it at Beth Am. We try to roll it out as thin as possible. Do not mix oil and water. The halachot are very kind of strict on this, which is there's concern. And when I say oil, I mean things that are not water. This also includes fruit juices. If you make matzah with water, you can also make matzah with oil or with fruit juices, right? But you can only use pure fruit juice or pure oil, and you can't add or mix in any other water during the process. It's either completely with fruit juice or completely with oil or completely with water. That means if you decide you want to cook it on a skillet, don't add some oil to make things not stick. Don't add oil to rolling pins. Don't add oil to your surfaces of anything. Because the mixing of oil and water is not halachically acceptable. If you have already seasoned a skillet or seasoned a wok, as long as it is clean and you don't add more oil to the process, then it is acceptable to use. I actually asked a Rav in Jerusalem about this, and that was the pasuk that he gave me. It wasn't something that was actually covered in the Shulchan Aruch, but I did ask, and that was the pasuk that I received, and it's the pasuk that I follow in my own home. If any pieces of your dough stick to your skillet or your cleaning or your cooking surface, right? Let's say you're cooking the dough on the surface and you did your best to make it non-stick, but some ends up sticking and you kind of got some dough stuck on there. That's fine. Leave it. Again, it's going to continue cooking or get burnt off and it won't become hametz. So just go through your baking process. Don't get caught up on the little things, right? And even let's say you're working with the dough and somehow you drop it and you're worried, oh my God, now something's on the floor. Again, you have 18 minutes from the moment you drop that dough. So you probably have enough time to finish cooking your matzah, and then you can go back and thoroughly clean that part of the kitchen, right? So again, just go through the process. Worry about whatever is going to happen after the fact. You can do all that after you're done cooking. So again, once your matzot are cooked through, they can never become hametz, so don't worry about it. Don't worry about if you have a slightly raw spot. Again, as long as you tear it and there's not actual a wet strand, or if you poke it through with a toothpick and nothing sticks, you are fine. Even if it looks like it's kind of a little bit raw, it's fine. Again, as long as it's a really low bar. The halakha is actually a very low bar. As long as you tear it and you don't have strands that are trying to stick and connect the pieces, you are fine. That is not an encouragement to undercook your matzah. I'm just saying, again, the halakha has a much lower bar than people actually realize. The halakha even talks about if you're cooking matzah next to hametz in the oven. We would never do that now. But it discusses that because that was a reality of people. A lot of people didn't have their own oven. So they might have to go use a communal oven or go use even a, God forbid, like a big bakery oven, and they would have, request to have something made for them, and they might be cooking next to hametz. So, there's thankfully we live in a time where we all have our own ovens and we all have our own kitchen and we can be as strict as we want to. So I'm just trying to give you what the baseline halacha is. In this process of making matzah, you can always add more water, but you cannot add more flour. The concern is that if you start adding flour someplace, it might not truly get mixed in with the water. It might not incorporate properly, and you will get this thing that in Yiddish they call gebrokst, I think. I don't know what this Yiddish is, not my forte. But that stringency, this gebrokst stringency, came about because people, Ashkenazim in general, and specifically, were not adding enough water to their dough. So there was a concern that there was actually dough or flour in the mixture that never got combined with water. And therefore, even though it was cooked, it actually remains as a dry flour. And the concern is that you're going to add it in your soup or add water to it. And now that flour that never actually had water before will suddenly have water and it could sit and become hametz. So you never want to add more flour to any part of this process. A lot of people, when normally making bread, will add flour to the dough when rolling it out, or right when they're about to put it on a pizza stone, because that creates a nonstick surface. You can't do that. If you want, you can have a bowl of water next to your dough, and when you roll out your dough, like and you're about to use the rolling pin, you can coat the dough ball with water for the rolling, and you can put water on it again when you're about to put it on your surface for cooking. And this is what Yemenites and Sephardim do. You can always add more water, and adding water to like the surface of the dough helps make it non-stick. So if you've got your dough ball, you can add water around it and roll it out, and then it's kind of flat, and then you can add water to it again before you put it on your cooking surface. So more water is always okay. And the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam talk about women who have an extra bowl of water. They call it for cooling the bread. It's also for smoothing the bread and for making it more non-stick. I'm going to touch back on what the thought process you should have when making matzah. You shouldn't be thinking that you are making this very separate bread, this very separate thing that's different from bread overall. It's not. You are making bread, but you are making bread that isn't as good as it could be. So you shouldn't think about you're making a specific cracker. You shouldn't think about that you need to add some holes. You shouldn't be thinking that this bread should be different than a normal flatbread. Even the Gemara talks, or it might even be the Mishnah talks about, if you walk into a room and it's during Pesach or Chag Matzot and you don't know if the flatbread is matzah or not, should you eat it? And the question is, well, how would you not know? Because they're supposed to look. It's supposed to look like normal bread. So you're making normal bread. It's just not going to taste as good. You're not adding any salt. You're not adding any spices. You're not adding flavorings. You're not adding any oil, which also adds a nice flavor. You're not adding, you're not making it more non-stick so that it comes out like nicer and fluffier and softer and, more things. Like, it's just terrible bread that we were making when we were running away from the Egyptians and we didn't have the time to make bread properly. That's all this is. All right? So again, most of baking matzah is not the rules that you follow. Most of baking matzah is making bread with limitations. So let me give you some general understandings of when you're making matzah that are going to become a problem. One is you have to have some general knowledge of how much water to add to flour. So if you look online and you take any normal bread recipe, it's like 2 to 1. It could be like, 2 cups water, 1 cup flour, or it could be the reverse. I forget which it is right now. I know once I start doing it with my hands. But if you've ever made bread before, you would know that sometimes you need even less water, sometimes you need even more water, and you kind of got to add the water as you're kneading it. So again, that's just the normal part of the bread process. So there isn't a specific recipe for matzah. All you do is you knead enough water with enough flour. That's it. And you'll know exactly how much you need because you've hopefully attempted to make this before. You've attempted to make bread before, so you kind of know where the sweet spots are in the kneading process. The other thing with making matzah is, again, since you don't have that oil and you can't add that extra flour, how to make it non-stick is an issue. That is very difficult. Again, so just have a separate cup of water on the side, and when the person is done kneading and they give you the chunk for you to roll out, or if you're baking it yourself and you've taken off a chunk, use that bowl of water on the side and put it on the dough, roll it out, and then again put some extra water on top of it on both sides, and then do your cooking surface. There's no maximum time for which you have to finish baking the bread. It's just as long as it bakes through and doesn't become raw in the middle. So you can use low enough temperature that as long as it completely bakes through. And again, you can use a skillet. If you use a skillet, that bread will cook through. You might need to flip it once, but it'll cook through in like 2 minutes max, as long as you have it on medium or high temperature, depending on your stove. So it's not that difficult of a process at all. But if you are making matzah, this is my other recommendation. Have a separate bowl with like some sort of towel in there, because when the matzah is done cooking, it's actually going to be really hot and kind of hard. And I usually throw it in this bowl where the towel is, and then I cover the matzot with the towel. So that way the moisture kind of stays in there and it'll become softer later. So if you're concerned that your matzah is coming out harder than you expected, don't worry about it. Just cover it, with a towel, or, if it cools down in some sort of bag, try to keep it airtight. So that way, it doesn't have any preservatives, doesn't have any salt, and it will soften up in a little bit. All right. If you are really good at this, and you know how to really knead properly, so you can make your dough very, very wet and very kind of stretchy, then that is the best way, because you will get the softest, fluffiest matzot that way. If you want to just add enough water that it's no longer just nonstick, that's also completely acceptable. Again, the matzot can vary wildly in how it comes out, just depending on your own skill level and how comfortable you are in making bread. Because again, this is just making bread process. So I'm going to include other videos of people who have made matzot, people whom I've spoken to, whom I've trusted about this process. Again, there's no specific recipe you need to follow. It's just the amount of water you need for the amount of flour that you are starting with. The only thing I would do is say, try making a batch. The only thing that I would say is that you should just keep in mind that you're making bread, and you should also keep in mind that it doesn't have to be perfect, and that you can clean things up at the end. And you can, again, as we covered in other halachot, you can use normal flour. The type of flour you use will also change how much water you need in the process. If you use a whole wheat flour, then that's also that's going to be a very different texture thing. It's going to be very different in how it feels in your hands. So, all these things are the bigger impacts on making matzah. The type of flour you have, how much whole wheat content is in the flour. Those are the things that are really, when you're making matzah, are going to cause the biggest problems. So if you're going to bake matzah at your home, I encourage you. I think it's great. That's definitely what all of the posts expected of us in general. They were not expecting us to be buying it. That's a very recent invention. And so I hope that you make it. And as a side note, I hope that you also enjoy this matzah, which will probably be more like a flatbread, with some lovely kitniyot. If it's not your custom to eat kitniyot, I understand. But again, this is a flatbread, so if you can put some hummus and tahina and other things in there in this flatbread, it really adds to the experience during your meal. So if you're considering it, understand that when people were eating matzah in the past, they were making it in the area of Israel and in the area of Babylon, which is Iraq. So it was made as a flatbread, and it was eaten as a flatbread with all the other flatbread accessories that we still are using today. So that is all the relevant laws. And again, I will also add the relevant laws accessible in the description for this, as well as more videos of people making matzah from beginning to end. I wish you all a very happy and kasher Pesach, and I look forward to seeing you once COVID ends. Take care. Hag Sameach.